let's get right into this. We have a lot to do. So we have this kind of, pendulum swinging back and forth. We had the evil Ahaz, we had the tzaddik Chizkiyahu, and now we have Chizkiyahu's son that he did not wish to have, Menashe. And Menashe is the most evil king that the kingdom of Yehuda ever had. And we have to look into what he does and what he says and try to figure out, how did this happen? Why did this happen? And what are we supposed to learn from it? Okay, so the first thing we have to understand is that the timeline with Chizkiyahu was like this. Chizkiyahu was king for 29 years. He was 25 years old when he became king. And he did not have children until late in life because he was afraid that he'd have an evil son. He knew this. So after his illness that we discussed in chapter 20, chapter 21, we see that he does have this son, Menashe. And his mother, let's screen share. His mother is the daughter of Yeshaya. This we saw in the Medrash before. Okay. And I really haven't been able to get my usual full showing, but I'll show you here. Oh no, this is it. Okay. Here's Chaf Aleph, a medium-sized chapter. And you see here, there's basically a few subjects, the story of Menashe and what he does, the reaction of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then the story of Menashe's son. That's basically how we divide it up. And Menashe, Pasuk Aleph, ben 12 shana Menashe b'malcho. He was 22. So if we said that Chizkiyahu did not want to have children, if he ruled for 25 years and he ruled for 29 years and became king when he was 25. So that means he was essentially about 54 and when he died. Now, Menashe, I'm sorry, I made a mistake here. Ben 12 shana Menashe b'malcho. His son is 22 when he rules. Menashe is only 12 years old. So when Chizkiyahu dies and he's like 54, 55, his successor, which is his first son, Menashe, is only 12. Therefore, he had him when he was like 42, if we're doing our math, something like that. And he rules Menashe for 55 years, which is the longest rule of any king in either kingdom. The only one, David and Shlomo were 40 years, and Asa was, I believe, 51. But this is really an extremely long reign. And the effects of what he does when he is the king have much more weight because he's got so many years that he's doing these things. Now, I have to say, this is like an interesting name. Hefziba in Hebrew means my desire is in her. And it's actually a very beautiful name. And this is one of those names that gets mangled in English, I have to say, because it turns into Hepzibah, which is pretty awful. Hepzibah. So we're going to go with the Hebrew, Hefziba. Like there's a few names like that, like Yitro becomes Jethro, or Yisha becomes Jesse. They just mangle the name. Anyway, he has all the right genes. His father is a big tzaddik. His mother is a daughter of Yeshaya, the prophet. But what can you do? Pasuk bet. Vayas harabei Hashem k'doim v'ot hagoyim asher horish Hashem et bnei Israel. He did evil in the eyes of God. Now, to'eva is an abomination. an abomination, like the abomination of the nations that Hashem had thrown out before Bnei Israel. So we know traditionally from our study of Chumash and Yoshua that Hashem has said the nations that live in this land are nations that are degenerate. Their pagan practices are full of immorality, depravity, and terrible rituals. And Hashem says, this cannot be in my holy land. It cannot be in my holy land. And the basic premise is, I'm going to get rid of these depraved pagans and bring in my nice Jewish people who are going to keep the Torah. And then we will have the holy people in the Holy Land. Did it actually work that way? Because, and Menashe, there's a couple of things that are with Menashe that are like more than anyone else. In other words, it says that Menashe did evil like the evil of those nations. This is going to a different place. First of all, we saw that the kings in the northern kingdom in Yisrael, they were really messed up. The kings, they were like, there was nobody righteous there. There was just one after another evil kings. But the kings of Yehuda were more likely to be righteous than to be evil. And so you have the Navi testifying that he did all those abominations like those nations, and we have a serious problem. Now, what's a gimel? Vayashav yiben et habamot asher ibad Chizkiyahu aviv. So he went and returned and he built up the bamot that his father Chizkiyahu had destroyed. Vayakam mizbachot laBaal, and he raised up altars for the Baal. Vayas Ashera kasher asa Achav melech Yisrael. Vayishtachu l'chol tzvah shamayim vayavorotam. So we have here a list of sins. First of all, the bamot. We have to talk about the bamot again. We mentioned that in the time of Chizkiyahu actually destroyed all the bamot. What are the bamot? Okay, the bamot are private altars. It's like you have your little shul in your backyard, and you don't have to be bothered to go to the regular shul, and you don't have to go to the Beit HaMikdash. You do your services when you want them, right in your own backyard. So the bamot are very controversial because they were originally made when there was no central place of worship. And then they were mutar, because the bamot are essentially set up in order to worship a Kadosh Baruch Hu. So what's the problem? So first of all, up until the time that Shiloh is set up, right, the Mishkan, the Jewish people were allowed to have bamot. And after Shiloh was destroyed, until the Beis HaMikdash is built, the people are allowed to have bamot. So these things were built at a time when they were permissible. But once the Beis HaMikdash was up and running, people were supposed to come and worship at the Beit HaMikdash. They weren't supposed to be doing bamot. So we have a problem. How do you get rid of this thing, which has a certain amount of sanctity? It was built in the time when it was allowed, and it's intended to be for Kadosh Baruch Hu. So most of the kings of Yehuda just left it in place. Even if they were not idolatrous, they left the bamot. But Chizkiyahu was a major reformer. He sets up schools everywhere. He sets up education for the Jewish people. Everyone has to know Torah. Everyone has to worship in the right place. And he gets rid of all the bamot. And then it's like interesting because his son, Dafka, the thing that he did, which was so amazing and hadn't been done before, the first thing that Menashe does is undo that. Tea, Neely, tea. Herbal tea, just saying. Told me not to drink coffee. In any event, there seems to be, though, that the bamot, even though they were, so to say, they were for Hashem, they did sort of open the door for Avodah Zarah. And so there seems to be, philosophically, the idea that I worship when I want, where I want, is soon going to become I worship who I want. So the next step is going to be Mizbachot LaBaal. Now, I did send you in the chat lovely pictures of the Baal. Notice this picture. I don't know if I got this through in the chat. This is the kind of Baal statues that they found, archaeologically. And this relief shows you here, and it's like very interesting if you read what it says here. Baal was the god of storm and provided fertility for crops and livestock. Baal was sensuously worshipped. The sacred men and women in Canaanite temples were prostitutes. Not only was a sexual temptation appealing, but the people of Israel, vulnerable to the weather, also wanted abundant agriculture. Now notice it says here in this relief, Baal is seen in his right hand with a club prepared to unleash a storm, and his left hand a spear with its point pointing down, and its tail emitting lightning. In other words, they were convinced that the Baal was the god of rain and of war and of all these things. So this is what they did with the Baal. Then you had Asherah. And he made Asherah like Ahab did. Now, Ahab is his role model. You know we're in trouble. The Asherah, so I sent you a picture of Asherah also. It's harder to know what the Asherah actually was. There's some connection to trees. Were they actual trees that were, sculpted into idols, or were they actually idols that were sculpted into the shape of trees? It's not really clear, but it's definitely a lot of nasty stuff happening here. And he also worshipped Kol Tzva Shamayim, all the stars, constellations. Pasuk Dalet, Ubana mizbachot b'veit Hashem asher amar Hashem b'Yerushalayim osim et shmi. Now, we're escalating here in the ladder of evil. He put altars in the Beis Hamikdash, where Hashem said, I'm putting my name on this building. This is Hashem's building. And he puts altars there. Now, a lot of the things that he does, his grandfather Ahaz did, but he does it worse and more with more chutzpah. Pasuk Hey. Vayiven mizbachot l'chol tzva shamayim b'shtei chatzrot beit Hashem. You see here, he built altars to all the hosts of the heavens in the two courtyards of the Beit HaMikdash. So like there is the courtyard of Yisrael. There's a courtyard of the Kohanim. According to the commentaries, that's what where he set them up. Achaz, so if we go ahead, maybe we'll go ahead here, I'll show you to chapter 23. When in chapter 23, we meet Yoshiyahu, who is the grandson of Menashe, and he is the last righteous king. Yoshiyahu tries to undo these things, and here it tells us more details. Okay, you'd bet. And the altars that were on the roof of the Beis HaMikdash, the Aliyah of Achaz that he did, and the altars that Menashe did in the two courtyards, he destroyed. So we have this interesting thing that Yoshiyahu does. You see here that Ahaz didn't have the chutzpah to put his altars that he's putting into the Beis HaMikdash in the actual Beis HaMikdash. He put it in an upper chamber somewhere. But his grandson, Menashe, has no shame, no limits, and he puts it actually in the Beis HaMikdash. And then we get to the really nasty stuff. Pasuk Vav. The He'avir et beno ba'esh. Okay, so in Devarim, 1 second, I gotta get the right thing here. Here's all these Isurim. Lo yimatzei b'cha ma'avir beno bito ba'esh. Kosim kesamim ma'oni menachish machashe b'chover chever shoel ovi doni v'dorish alametzim. All of these things are straight up prohibitions right there in Chumash Devarim. You cannot pass your son through the fire. The Molech worship, Rashi says. They made two bonfires on either side to pass the child between them both. Now, I just want to add that it's not clear if all the children died from that worship, but many of them did. And it was taking place in the Gay Ben Hinnom, in the valley of Ben Hinnom, also known as Tophet. So the guy Ben Hinnom, I think I mentioned at this this point at some time in some previous discussion that Gay Ben Hinnom is that valley. Like if you're standing at Shar Yafo and looking out, so that valley, right past Mamila on your right, where they have an amphitheater, they have shows there. That is the valley of Gay Ben Hinnom. And when you take out the Ben, you get Gay Hinnom, which is the expression for hell, as you know. And the Tophet was they played drums to mask the screams and the cries of the poor children. So this was a horrific satanic and demonic rite that was very common. And I did get you a picture of the Molech. Let's see here. So there's a lot of fire with the Molech, and the other pictures are even more horrible. And you get the idea. So he took his son, he put him through the fire. So I don't know if that son survived, and the other sons, we don't know. Onaim is a person who divines by the onot, by the times. Divination that happens by if you see this, then this will happen, this stuff. Now, Over Yidoni the Over is particularly necromancer, like the people who would raise the dead and stuff, like the Balat Ov, the witch of Endor in Shmuel, when Shaul goes to her. In the Yidonim, there was a specific bone apparently that they would use to figure out what the future was going to be. Now, before I go on with Pasuk Vav, I just want you to understand, all of these things are building on one on the other. In other words, you have this idea of Avera Goreret Avera. He did one thing, he started with the putting back the Bamot, and then he started doing the Avodah Zarah, and then he started doing the evil rites, and then he started doing the necromancy and all this sick stuff. And it gets worse. And now we have something that we never saw before. Hirba La'asot hara b'nei Hashem. He did more to do evil as I couldn't. Trying to think, how much more can I do to do evil eyes of Hashem? And then you get this word, lahachis. He did it to make God angry. And this is sort of mind-boggling because, in a certain sense, does that make any sense? If you want to anger God, then you're actually acknowledging God. And if you're acknowledging God, then you know that he's powerful. Why would you want to anger someone who has power over you? So it seems as if to Menashe, it's all one God against another, like all the gods were equal. There's something very weird about this story. We're going to try to explore this in a minute. But for our understanding, it's very important to say everything he did was lahachas. We say when you take a Hebrew word and you mangle it, you get Yiddish, you get Yeshivish. And you hear people say, he did it lahachas. Lahachas. You don't know how to spell that or how to pronounce it. But this is the correct word. Lahach is to make angry. He's trying to get God angry. And it's a very, very disturbing thing, right? It just gets worse and worse. Pasuk Zayin. Vayasem et pesela asherah asher asa b'bayit shamar Hashem al David ve'el Shlomo b'no b'bayit hazeh Yerushalayim asher b'charti b'kol shetei Yisrael asim et shmi le'olam. He put the Asherah tree Asherah idol that he made, he put it in the house, right, that Hashem had told David and Shlomo, this will be the house that I choose. This will be the place that I choose from all the places, from all the tribes of Israel, and that's where my name will be. And if, I don't know, the camera's doing weird things here. Sorry. Pasuk Chet, v'lo usif lahanid regel Yisrael min adama shenatati lavotam. Rak im yishvu lasot kechol asher tzivitim u'chol haTorah asher tzivah avdi Moshe. And and Hashem is recalling what he had said at that time, that I will not continue to make the feet of the Jews wander from the land that I gave their forefathers. as long as if they keep the mitzvot that I commanded them. Sarah had to broke the first two, Anochi Hashem, Lo Yelecha, Elohim Achirim. The first two are specifically talking about this. If they would keep this Torah, they would never have to wander again. All the Torah that Moshe had commanded, pasuk that the Lo Shameyu, they didn't listen. In other words, it's something that we have to just face. Like if they had done what they were supposed to do, there would have been no gullus. And don't forget, the Jewish people saw what happened to the northern kingdom. 10 tribes are gone. They're gone. Till today, we don't know what happened to the 10 tribes. So doesn't that say you should be careful? But no, below Shameyu, they didn't listen. This is 10. And Menashe caused them to go astray, to go astray. Menashe caused them to do evil more. And this is where we get the expressions that Menashe's evil are described are worse than anyone else. First of all, we never had anyone like the Hachis, out and out trying to anger God. And now he did more evil. More evil than all those nations that God destroyed when he brought in the Jewish people. So, this is just, how low can you go is basically the question that Menashe seems to be asking. How much evil can I accomplish? Now, this section, after this section, there is the prophecy, but there's a few things we should explore here. Number one, again, that Menashe was the one who did this to anger God. And number two, he was worse than everybody else. And number three, even Achaz, his evil grandfather, didn't have the chutzpah that he did. And this will get worse as we go along because we find out some more evil things that Menashe does. And we have to first raise the question. We'll go ahead a little bit and then we'll try to answer the question. The question is, how did this happen? How did a man born to a tzaddik of a father who could have been Mashiach, a mother who was the daughter of one of the greatest prophets we ever had, how could they produce this evil being who can't think of enough evil things to get God? How did this work? How did this happen? How do we understand it? How is it possible? So there's two things I want to talk to you about with that, but I think maybe we'll try to decide what should we do first. No, let's go ahead a little. There's something more important to talk about before we try to figure it out. Pasuk Yud. And Hashem spoke to the people, right, at the hands of his servants, the prophets. So now I ask you, what? Ooh. And this is something that you see right away. Up until now, we know who the prophets are, and his grandfather is a prophet. And if you go to the first pasuk of Yeshaya, okay, the first pasuk of Yeshaya says, Chazar Yeshayahu ben Amoz, Asher Chazal Yudav Yerushalayim, the vision of Yeshaya, the son of Amoz, who prophesied over Yehuda Yerushalayim, Bimei, Uzziah, Yotam, Achaz, and Chizkiyahu, Malchei Yehuda. 4 kings, Uzziah, Yotam, Achaz, and Chizkiyahu. But we know that Yeshaya is alive when Menashe is born. So how come we don't say Chizkiyahu and Menashe? Rashi says here, who are these servants? Nachum and Habakkuk. And Radak says Yoel also, right? Lefi Shaya Menashe Rasha Lo Nikru al Shmo Lefarei Shebiyamav Hayu. all these prophets did not want to say that they were prophets at the time of Menashe. In other words, you could call me, in the time of Achaz, because when Achaz was chastised, he humbled himself, right? There was something less chutzpahdik about Achaz. But now you have the situation of Menashe, who has no shame whatsoever, and nobody wants to be called the Navi at this point. They don't want their name associated with this evil man. Now, Yaakov Kamenetsky says in Emes Yaakov that every king, it's an interesting thought, that every king hired a royal Navi. Even someone like Achav hired Eliyahu. Eliyahu had an official position as Navi to the king. And Menashe didn't do that. He didn't want to have a king who was a Navi who was connected with him. He was not interested. Okay. Now here is the content of the prophecy, and it's pretty bad. Pasuk Aleph. Ya'an asher asa Menashe melech Yehuda hato'evot ha'eleh. Since Menashe, the king of Yehuda, did all these abominations, hey ra mikol asher asu ha'emori shel fanav, he caused more evil than all of the Emori, the pagan Emori, did before him. Vayachti gavet Yehuda b'gilulav, and he also caused Yehuda, the whole kingdom, to sin with his idols. Pasuk Bet. Lachein, ko amar Hashem Elokei Israel. Therefore, thus says Hashem, the God of Israel, Hineni may be Ra'al Yushalayim Yehuda, asher kol shom'ah titzalna shtei aznav. Hashem, thus says Hashem, the God of Israel, I am bringing evil on Yerushalayim and Yehuda, that everyone who hears it, his ears will ring. We actually heard this expression in Shmuel Aleph, chapter 3, when Shmuel gets his first prophecy about the destruction of Shiloh and the capture of the Aron. A catastrophe is coming. And this is the first time that we see in Melachim the discussion of the Galus and the destruction, the Churban that's coming. And anyone who hears it will be so disturbed, who hears what has happened, that his ears will ring. The same idea as the destruction of Shiloh. Now, so one of the things that is strange here is that, is the king responsible for this? Is the nation responsible for this? Like, who's at fault here? Pasuk Gimel. I will stretch out a line of Shomer, the one I took for Shomer, the same measurement that the northern kingdom had. Now the Kav seems to measure its building tools. The Kav measures the horizontal line, and the Mishkolet measures, it's a weight that measures that the vertical lines are straight. I'm going to measure everything. And when I finish measuring, when the measure is full, umachiti et Yerushalayim. I will wipe out Yerushalayim, just as one wipes the plate clean and wipes it off and turns it over to make sure there's nothing left. I don't know, I have a hard time even reading this. Like, this is the nevuah of the up and coming Churban, and it's coming up at the ends of Melachim, a very terrible tragedy that we mourn until today. Natashti et she'erit nachlati, pasuk Yudalid, Unatatim biyad oivehem, v'ayu levaz u'meshisa l'chol oivehem. I will abandon the remnant of my inheritance. What's the remnant? 10 tribes are gone. There's only 2 left, right? I'm going to abandon them also. I'll give them to their enemies, and they will be levaz. They'll be treated with contempt. And Meshisa, we say that in Chadodim, Ayulav Shisa, they will be plundered. by all their enemies. This is the most horrific punishment. And Pasuk Tet Vav gives us a very strange thought here. I'm sorry, Tet Vav. And also, since they did evil in my eyes and they angered me, from the day they left Egypt until today. Now, this is so disturbing because this generation of Menashe, are they getting the punishment for 800 years of Jewish sinning? It seems odd. It seems dreadful. How can this be? The Malbim talks about it here. He says, right? They all followed Menashe's evil, right? Because they're doing the sins of their fathers. In other words, if a generation sees the sins of their ancestors and continues, then they get punished for the sins of the ancestors as well, because they should have, changed things around. And it's very sad, very disturbing. But apparently there is a pattern of bad behavior gets stuck into the culture. It's very hard to shake it free. Hashem is very angry with this. And now we skip over all of the Bein Adam Lamakom things, and we add in another element, Tetzayin. And this is what I wanted to bring out because it's really a very critical point. We've had, the first base image was destroyed for the three big sins. Okay, so we had Avodah Zarah, and Avodah Zarah comes along with Gilai Rayos because there's so much promiscuity and degeneracy that goes along with the Avodah Zarah, the cultic prostitutes, and all this stuff. And now we have Pasuk Tetzai Begam Damna Ki Shafach Menashe Harbei Ma'od, and also Menashe killed many innocent people, Harbei Ma'od. So now we have the third of the cardinal sins, murder. Until blood filled Yerushalayim from one end to another. The expression Pelapeh is interesting. We'll get back to that. Besides all the other evils of the Bein Makom and the Avodah Zarah and the Gilai Rayos, now there's so much murder of innocents. And how did that happen? And what does it mean? So number one, okay, let's understand, right? The Ralbag says anyone who opposed Menashe got killed, and that includes prophets. So that would seem the pshat of this thing, right? Mitsudas adds that once Menashe made murder so commonplace, then everybody was murdering everybody else. And I have to say, just as a personal reflection, that I fully believe that crime and murder increase the more you see it around. So, for example, I hate to say this, there's certainly no question in my mind that violence on the screen, violence in, movies has a terrible effect on society, a very corrupting effect. If you're watching people get killed all the time, there are, like back when I was a kid, if you watch TV and someone got killed, you never saw any blood. So it wasn't good, but it wasn't as violent. Now, violence became a thing. I have a lot of theories about this, but we don't have time for it. But this is the Mitsudas. He says everybody was killing everybody. But the Chazal say something completely different. There's so much Gemara about Menashe. So, I don't even know where to start. So let's do first this disturbing thing, and I hope I can find all the different things that I opened about Menashe. Mostly in Sanhedrin here. Okay. Right here. Right. Shaharag Yeshaya. He killed Yeshaya, his own grandfather. right? Asa Salem, he made an idol so big that 1,000 people had to carry it, and they would die from that. He would kill them with this idol. But Rabbah says, "Shkul neshama shel tzad yechad keneged kol ha'olam kulo," and that is according to the opinion that he killed Yeshaya. Yeshaya, his grandfather, was such a great tzaddik, and he was such a great person that just killing him was like shedding rivers of blood. Now, we saw also, if you recall, a few chapters back, when Yehoash kills Zechariah, the prophet, and what a terrible thing that was. And I want to see. Okay. All right. Okay, the whole discussion, I think it's in your almost here. Right. He had a whole fight with Yeshaya. And this is where we get into a very, very strange story. But I think we got to go here first. I'm going to jump around a little bit the Gemaras here. This is a very famous thing. Okay, so because there's so much about Menashe in this Gemara, I'm just going to show it to you in an organized midrash situation, because I can't keep jumping around here. Okay, why was he called Menashe? Because Menashe has the connotation of forgetfulness. Yosef calls his son Menashe ki nashani Elokim be'eretz amali, that God helped me forget all my troubles. And here it says Menashe because he forgot Hashem, or because he caused other people to forget Hashem. Shimon ben Azai says, right, I found a Megillat Yuchsin, right, a genealogy, a scroll of genealogy which says that Menashe killed Yeshaya. And here, do you think it's possible? This is the Migmar there in Sanhedrin, but like I said, it's more condensed here, easier for me. Is it possible that Chizkiyahu taught Torah to the whole country, didn't teach Torah to his son Menashe? Right? Allah mikol Torah shatarabo, mikol amal shamalbo, lo helehu mutav el yisur. With all that Chizkiyahu tried to put into Menashe in those 12 years, nothing brought him back except suffering. Hold on to that thought. Okay, then we come to this famous Gemara here. Okay. So you have here, and this just makes our question more intense. We are now being told that Chizkiyahu taught Menashe Torah. And in fact, there's a very famous Gemara. I wanted you to see it inside, right? Menashe appears to Rav Ashi in a dream. Rav Ashi was a great Torah scholar, and he was talking about this very famous Mishnah. I'm going to have to keep jumping back here. Okay, the Mishnah says, Shlosh Melachim Elam Chelek Lo Maba, Yeravim Achav Menashe. 3 kings have no share in the world to come. Yeravim Achav Menashe. Rabbi Yehuda says Menashe has a share in the world to come, and we got to get back to that in a minute. But you have here, am I? Okay. Rav Ashi says, tomorrow we're going to talk about our friends, the 3 kings. In other words, the 3 kings who did not have a share in the world to come. And Menashe appears to him in a dream. He says, who are you calling friend? I know much more than you. Menashe, he says to him, and he asks him a very strange halachic shaila. When you make hamotzi, which part of the bread do you cut first? Rav Ashi says, I don't know. So Menashe says, you think you call me your friend? I know much more Torah than you. And Rav Ashi says, tell me the answer. And he's a real litvak. Why do you know the answer? Where do you open the bread? Now, this is something that I didn't want to, I don't even know how to explain this, but apparently the idea is that the place where the bread darkens first is the place where, in other words, wherever the crust comes first, like the end piece of the crustiest piece, that's for you, Debbie, the crustiest piece, that is where you open the bread. And Rav Ashi says, I'm going to tell over this halacha in your name tomorrow. And I just but not, Rav Ashi is so stunned. I don't understand. He says, you know so much Torah. Since you know so much Torah, how could you be such an idol worshiper? It doesn't make any sense to me. And this is the famous answer of Menashe, right? If you would have lived when I lived, you would have picked up your cloak and you would have run after me. You do not understand the Yetzer Hara Avodah Zarah. Nobody understands it. This is a tremendous lesson for us in judging people, right? Do not judge your friend until you're in that place. The Chazal, in their great wisdom, after the first temple was destroyed, asked God to remove the Yetzer Hara for idol worship. Not a thing that we can understand. How can anybody worship these crazy looking idols and figurines? To us, it's a joke. But what is Menashe telling Rav Ashi? I know lots of Torah, but the Yetzer Hara was too great for me. And you can't judge me because you weren't there. And you don't know what I lived through. It's very, very strange. Now, once we go into that idea, then we have to say, wait. Now we've made the question even greater. He knows so much Torah. How can he do the things he did when he knows so much Torah? And this is really extremely disturbing. And I think it's important because you know this in the context of two evil people that we learned about in Shmuel, Doeg, Shaul's evil genius, and Achitophel, who was David's friend and turned against him to help Absalom, who were tremendous Torah scholars. And it was just a very terrible thing for us to look in the face. You can be a Torah scholar and a completely evil person. So how do we understand this? Before we get to the end of all this, let's just try to understand what happened here. Why? Okay, so the first thing we have to say is we don't understand the Yetzer Hara. Okay, given that. Another discussion that I've seen, okay, Rabbi Alex Israel and Rabbi Goldstein from YU, a couple of the more modern people place this in a geopolitical context, which is very interesting. And they just discuss this whole issue of Ashur. Now, where I have some good maps of this. Yeah. I'm always loving good maps. Okay, I'm not finding my beautiful new map. Okay, but it's a good one. I get a few. Here it is. The diasporas in the time of Yeshaya. Here you have our little tiny Israel. Our little tiny Israel. Here is Assyria. And here is Babel. Now, Assyria has taken over the entire area. There is no more Ammon, Moab, Aram, Egypt. It's all Ashur. And here you have our little kingdom of Yehuda, 2 tribes left, and Chizkiyahu is dead. Now, at the end of the story of the great miracle that happened for Chizkiyahu with Sennacherib's army being destroyed, you have another strange thing happening there. Sennacherib is killed by his sons, and his son Asar-Haddon takes over. That's a very ominous thing. And then there's another king of Ashur after Asarhaddon. His name is Ashurbanipal, who isn't mentioned, I don't believe, in the Tanakh, but he is mentioned in the Chronicles of Assyria. So there were two, not one, but two super powerful kings coming up after Sancherib. And lo and behold, their army, which was destroyed by God, is just refilled. Another bunch of, more Assyrians and parts of the conquered people, and they're all part of the army. Menashe makes a calculation. I can't do what my father did. If I rebel, Ashur is now bigger, stronger, and meaner than it ever was. So I better be a good boy with Ashur. So he submits himself to the kingdom of Ashur. And being politically a vassal of Ashur, you also become a cultural sacrifice, because the dominant culture of the dominant power takes over everything. And it's hard for us to understand it, but I think we can see that, like, when in modern times a nation is conquered by another nation, they bring in their culture, and sometimes it's pretty bad. And you can see this, like, just look what's going on in Iran today. The Iranians were taken over, and another foreign culture was put upon them. So in that is a way of trying to understand why Menashe did what he did. He absorbs the culture and he goes with it because that's who the power is. So that's an attempt at understanding Menashe. But of course, nothing he did was correct. We're trying to understand it. Now, just want to finish this Perek because I want to show you something startling in Divrei Yamim. Pasuk Yudzai, v'yeser Divrei Menashe chol sherasar had the sour Shapell of Ksuvim al Sefer Divrei Yamim Malchi Yehuda. Chapter verse 17. There is Sefer Divrei Yamim Malchi Yehuda. This is not our Sefer Divrei Yamim. This was some chronicles of those kings, and we do not have that book. Vayishka Menashe mavotav pasuk Yechet. He slept with his fathers. That is an indication that he died a natural death. He's buried in the garden of his house, not in the burial place of the kings. Probably everyone was aware that that was inappropriate. That he shouldn't be buried with his righteous forefathers. Pasuk Yutet. He was 22 amon. Okay, remember, Menashe was king for 55 years. His oldest son, is 22 at this time. Could be that there were other sons that were killed in the Molech worship. But this means 33 years into his reign, and he ruled at 12. So he's 45 when he has this child. Another good guy, just evil. Just follow his father's evil footsteps. Served all the idols, he browsed to them. He abandons Hashem, the God of his fathers, and he did not go in the way of Hashem. But he does meet a sticky end, not like his father, who dies a natural death. His servants conspired against him and murdered him. Charming. But the people didn't want to have all this kind of conspirators, and they gathered up and they killed the conspirators, the assassins. Right? Yoshio is only 8 years old. He's 8 years old. Ammon, don't forget, is 22, and he's killed at the age of 24. And his son Yoshio is only 8, so he's already got fathered the son, he's 16. Right? But the people decide, we don't want these assassins. They kill the assassins, and they bring in Yoshio, this little 8-year-old. But yet to Once again, a book we do not have. We will be happy to meet Yoshiyahu next time. But the story of Menashe is not complete here. And the chapters in Divrei Yamim tell a whole different story, which is really fascinating. I want to look with you. So first of all, there's this whole thing, just like we saw this is Divrei Yamim Bet, chapter 33. And this is why I want to go on with Divrei Yamim, because I think it will solidify a lot of what we learned in the last few years. So that's the plan. It's very fascinating stuff, and this is not in Melachim. So we have here very similar. He became king, right, when he was 12, and he ruled for 55 years, and he did evil, blah, blah, blah. Okay, everything here is very, very similar. Then Pitom, right? Yeah, he put his son through the fire in Geben Hinnom, and he made a pesel, and right, the things that the Rebbeim say. Okay. Hashem gets very angry at him, and this is nowhere in Melachim. It's fascinating. Pasuk Aleph here. Hashem brought the army of king of Ashur. They captured Menashe with hooks. They tied him up with copper chains, and they took him to Babel. No, it's just not in Melachim at all. New story. And when he was in trouble, he davened to Hashem. He pleaded, Chilat B'nei Hashem. And he submitted himself before Hashem, his God of his fathers. Pasuk Yud Gimel. And he davened to Hashem, and Hashem heard his pleas, returned him to Shalayim, to his kingdom, and Vayeda Menashe ki Hashem hu Elokim. In Melachim, we don't hear about this. The earth-shattering thing that Menashe did tshuva. Not in Melachim at all. We have to figure out why that would be. And then you have the aftermath of his tshuva. He built things in Ir David, right? And he raised things up, and he removed the foreign gods and the Salem from the house of Hashem, and all the altars that he built, he got rid of them, and he built an altar only for Hashem, and he gave sacrifices, peace offerings, and thanks offerings. By Yom Elihud, and he told his people, La'avod et Hashem, okay, so serve Hashem. Okay, they got rid of some idols, and but they didn't get rid of their mamot. What just happened? How come the tshuva Menashe is not even mentioned in Melachim? And this is a very difficult question. So we have to say like this. Perhaps Melachim and Divrei Yamim have entirely different agendas. And when we see what happens with Ammon, right, Menashe's son, and when we see the downward spiral toward the destruction and exile, the big picture in Melachim is his tshuva is too little, too late. He cannot turn the tide of the evil that he created. He can't fix it. And even though, right now, according to Chazal, okay, there's a lot of things here, because it says that he did evil like Achav. Achav was king for 22 years. So they say if he was king for 55 years, that means after 22 years of being like Achav, then he did his tshuva, and the next 33 years of his rule, he was trying to undo all the harm that he did. That is how Chazal understand it. You have to see this inside. Because it's like stunning medrash, crazy. Here you go. And they captured him with copper chains. They made for him a cauldron, a device that was cut in half. Half of it had coals, and half of it had water to boil up. And they put him in that water and they started heating up the cauldron. This is something out of a horror movie. This is what they're doing to torture Menashe, right? And when he saw his trouble, he did not leave one avodah zarah in the world that he didn't call out. Plony, God, save me. Plony, God, save me. And of course, that wasn't much help. And finally, he said, I remember that my father used to teach me this pasuk. Okay, and I have this pasuk for you. But tsar lecha, when you have trouble, when you find all these terrible things come after you, in later days, you will return to Hashem and you will hear his voice. Because God is a merciful God. He will not abandon you. He will not destroy you. This is actually, to me, a very moving idea. Chizkiyahu, in his insight and his foresight and his wisdom, taught the little Menashe, when you have trouble, you can do tshuva. When things are rough, you can do tshuva. Hashem is merciful. He will hear your tshuva. So he says, I remember my father teaching me this pasuk, maybe I can do tshuva. And now I'm calling out to God. If he answers me, good. And if not, he's just the same as all those other idols. At that time, the angels came up and they blocked all of the entrances to heaven. It's an interesting image. We don't know exactly what that means. And they said, Ribono Olamim, a man who put an idol in your temple, you're going to accept his tshuva? How can it be? Amar l'mekadosh baruch hu, im eini mekablo b'tshuva, hareini noel petzach b'pnei kol ba'alei tshuva. If I don't accept his tshuva, I am closing the ability, I'm locking the ability for any Baal Tshuva to come to me. I can't turn away a person who's doing tshuva, because what does that tell others? Mas HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to get around the angels, so to speak. He made a little hole under his throne of glory, as if we can't imagine what this actually means. He made a pipeline for the tshuva of Menashe to reach him, and he heard his pleas, and that is what we said in Divrei Yamim. He prayed to Hashem, he pleaded to Hashem, and he was heard. And as a result, the idea that the three kings didn't have a share in the world to come, there is a machloket on the status of Menashe. Did Menashe have a share in the world to come? According to this medrash, he did. His tshuva was accepted. And if you look at Divrei Yamim, which is so fascinating, he tried to undo the harm he had done, but apparently it was too late. And it's kind of sad, but for us, the message is clear. You can always do tshuva. Try not to wait till it's too late. But again, this is the king of Israel. His influence was so great, and the downward spiral was very difficult. And when we get to Yoshiyahu, we have another king, next chapter, who's going to try to pull the brakes and stop the downward spiral here. In any event, I think I spoke very fast here because I wanted to get through all this Perek and also talk about the Divrei Yamim, but it's actually fascinating to think this whole story about Menashe is not told in Melachim. I have one more thing to show you and then I'll let you go, and that is here. This is chapter 66 in Tehillim. Lamnatzeh Shir Mismar Hari Elokim Kol Haaretz. Pitom, the Malbim says, Lonis Kashem Chabroni. There are many, many chapters in Tehillim that we don't know who wrote them. They're called orphan chapters, right? Lidati, says the Malbim, Mechabro hu Menashe ben Chizkiyahu. In my mind, Malbim says, this is the Tehillim of Menashe, the son of Chizkiyahu, right? Ki hebi Hashem alav et sarei hatzavah shel lemelech Ashur, right? He goes through this medrash, and he davens to Hashem, and he brought him back. And Menashe knew that Hashem was God. This we just read in Divrei Yamim. And if you look at this Tehillim, and you'll follow the Malbim, it's brilliant. He says the first part is the general behavior of God, his greatness. The second part, until Selah, the first Selah. The second one is God's miraculous salvation until the second Selah. Then it talks about the nations and the things that he suffered until the third Selah. And then what the Jews should do, they should thank God and accept God as king. So next time you do Tehillim 66, think of Menashe, think of his tshuva. He says these interesting things, right? He says, you brought us into the fortress. You pressured us, right? We came through fire and water, and you brought us out into freedom. So I kind of love that Malbim. And I'm going to stop the screen share. If anyone has any questions, thoughts, ideas, Menashe is. I think that if you do Menashe without doing the Divrei Yamim, it's just too much of a downer. But the Divrei Yamim gives us a little bit of a way to see him in a more favorable light.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah.
Where so what happened to these two, like you said, we don't have these books. Which books are you talking about that we don't have it's in the
Well, at the end of every king, there's like a certain standard way of ending a king's career. It says the rest of his deeds are written in the chronicles of the kings. So apparently there were chronicles of the kings of Yehuda, but we don't know where those books are. So we don't know. But we have chronicles, but our chronicles, that will be Bezrat Hashem, the next book that we learn, that is not Navi. That is Ketuvim. It's much later. It's Second Temple period. And it's written by Ezra. And that's Ezra's kind of retelling of Jewish history for the purposes of the Second Temple period and of the people who are coming back from the Galut. And he has a different agenda. And Yirmiyahu is the one who puts together the Nevuos of Melachim. And Yirmiyahu has a different agenda than Ezra, because Yirmiyahu wants to teach the Jewish people, this is what you did wrong, and this is what happened because of it. And Ezra is like, yeah, that's history. You could still do tshuva. You could do tshuva. We could make a second temple. We could be okay. Don't despair. Different messages, different agendas, different books. And that's why you'll find some things in Divrei Yamim that you won't find in Melachim. It's like, you can't kind of certainly say from Melachim, a lot of the earlier Nevi'im as well, but say from Melachim, it's almost impossible to learn without referencing Divrei Yamim. So, okay, well, we'll just look at that straight and we'll cross-reference. Yeah.
I have a question, but I could be totally. Oh, sorry. You can go. You can finish. It's okay.
It's okay. Just wondering, Divrei Yamim. I haven't heard of the book, the Sefer Divrei Yamim. Where do I find?
Well, if you have a Tanakh, it's the last.
Oh, it's the last book? Okay.
It's the last book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, fine. Okay. Thank you. Sorry. Go ahead, Zara.
It's okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Out of the Ketuvim. The Ketuvim are the three books of Emet, which are
Okay.
Eo, Mishlei, Tehillim. They're called Sifrei Emet. Those are philosophical works. Then you have the 5 Megillot, right? And then you have the Aramaic books, Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah. And then you have Divrei Yamim, Chronicles. That's the content of Ketuvim. We are finishing Nevi'im Rishonim, but I am skipping Nevi'im Achronim and giving myself the possibility of doing it later. But Nevi'im Achronim is a lot of poetry, and I'm not sure that that.
But also, like, isn't it like some of them are not exactly chronologically like correct? Like even like, I mean, I heard this and I might be repeating it wrong. I think I heard it from Daddy, but I might be repeating it wrong. But that even the end of Shoftim, Shmuel wrote, and he wrote it later on for specific reasons, like the three last stories that were horrific. He specifically put them there because at first he was against having a king. And then because we needed a king, he explained how dire things were in order to understand why we needed the king. But also here, and again, I could be repeating it wrong with Menashe, who was like the worst of the worst. I mean, I'm saying he did tshuva, but like while he was horrible, he was horrible. And I might be repeating it wrong. I think it was also Amos Yaakov. I think Rabbi Yaakov says that it was a hanging nun because he's a direct descendant of Moshe, but it was such a busha that he came from Moshe. No, am I saying it wrong? Am I confusing something?
Menashe.
Oh, okay, fine. Okay.
Menashe. That's a story. That's a story in Shoftim.
Okay. With Micha. Yeah. Okay, fine. Yeah.
Micha.
Okay.
Because Micha is a grandson of Moshe. And that's chapter 18, 17 and 18, a story of the Isle of Micha.
Okay.
And that is the nun that's hanging. It's like at the very end of chapter 18 of Shoftim. And that nun tells you his grandfather's called Menashe, but it's really, and it's not talking about Micha, it's talking about the Levi.
Right.
That's Yonatan, the son of Gershom, the son of Moshe. Okay. And they put a nun there for the honor of Moshe, not the same Menashe. That means.
But I mean, it seems like it's not a very desirable name overall. Anyway, could be wrong.
Well, the Menashe was a very great person, but the Menashe, we have other places where you have someone who's very righteous, and then it's someone has the same name who's not. So I'm going to give some examples as soon as we get off this Zoom, but right now I'm not thinking of it. But you have people who are like, the good guys and bad guys. But the Chazal explained the word Menashe because when Yosef calls his son Menashe, he's saying, Ki nashane Elokim be'eretz Amali, God, help me forget all my troubles. There it also says with Beit Avi, in the house of my father, it's not such a good thing to forget the house of your father. Right. And he gets called out on that, but the idea of forgetting. So this Menashe, and many Menashe is not a bad name, but this Menashe was saying he caused people to forget Hashem, or he himself forgot Hashem.
Got it.
To do with forgetfulness.
Okay.
So I think there are other Menashes, but I'm not sure. But there's definitely Menashe, the son of Yosef, and the tribe, which produced many great people. And then there's this bad guy. But he does tshuva. It's like a very startling thing, Derayon. It's really interesting. And the Chazal say, I started reading that to you, but I didn't finish it, that what education may not do, suffering may do. In other words, Chizkiyahu tried so hard to instill in him Torah, and he didn't do tshuva until he suffered, until he thought he was going to die.
Isn't that the common story for our nation sometimes?
Yeah. But the interesting thing to me is to think about his father, sitting him down and teaching him, when you have trouble, you could do tshuva, and making him memorize these psukim. When you have trouble, you could do tshuva. So that's what would come back to him. It's like a really, really brilliant thought, because Chizkiyahu was very into education. So he said, maybe I could plant in there a seed that will someday work. It's really an interesting story. Yeah.
How do we know that Tehillim came from him? There's no mention. I mean, it starts like any other Tehillim.
That's what the Malbim says. I'm not sure where the Malbim gets it. I'd have to really explore it. It's a Malbim. The Malbim says this fits Menashe.
Because it starts like when it's Seach, Shir, Mizmor, Lizavi. Like, how?
No David there.
Wait, oh yeah. Well, it's funny, you know what? Okay, Mizmor. Call arts. Oh, okay.
See, so the Malbim was trying to find, a correlation between a Perek of Tehillim that had no, name, because so many of them are Mizmor Asaf, Tefillah Moshe, right? Shir Mizmor Bnei Korah. So many of these have authors, like who said it. So he was looking for something that didn't have an author, and that the content of it worked with Menashe. So you put me in fire and water, and you set me free. It's a very interesting thing in general. Like, why would the Assyrians let him go free? That's great. It's a great miracle God did for him.
And he went back to Eretz Yisrael.
And not only that, he went back to being king.
But he was a completely different king when he went back. Or he wasn't.
He tried to fix what he had messed up.
Right. Well. Thank you.
Okay, ladies.
It was a very big mess up.
Yeah, it's really sad.
But honestly, when we look at those Elilim, I just think that none of us can truly understand it. We really can't. We don't have that taiva for Avodah Zarah. I mean, I look at it, it looks ridiculous to me. It looks stupid. I don't get it.
Right. So this is why Menashe, there's a very famous passage with Rav Ashi and Menashe. And I think one of the things you take from there is don't judge people. Because you don't know their temptations. You don't know what's going on in their lives. You can't judge people. And Rav Ashi says, how could this be? In fact, the Malbim has a discussion also at the end, by the Divrei Yamim, how come they didn't fix everything? Because they didn't learn enough Torah to fix it. The generation of Chizkiyahu, they all knew Torah. That's why they were able to have that miracle of Sanchera. Anyway, ladies, next week is the 13th. Bezrat Hashem, we're going to do Yoshiyahu. We're going to begin Yoshiyahu. And the week after the 20th, I have a wedding. So I will not be able to teach on the 20th. And the 27th, we will have one more chapter. And then the beginning of February, we have 22, 23, 24, 25. We have 4 more chapters. And then everyone's going to have to bring some wine. And we will drink l'chaim, not just finishing Melachim, not just finishing Melachim Bet, but finishing all of the Mishonim, which is a very big accomplishment.
Thanks, Mom. Perfect. Thank you.
Have a good night. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.